Style over substance. It's the constant argument made to explain Wes Anderson's Dollhouse aesthetic, his seemingly less than emotional characters, and the ever-winding stories he creates which seem to go to nowhere, or at least seem to be confusing, alienating, or dry. The argument has been increasingly made as his filmography progresses, with audiences generally taking Anderson's aesthetic to be definitive, but increasingly less innovative. Despite creating new imaginative settings, all his films go ever more into a conglomerate of symmetry, pastels, and clipping dialogue. And because of this, his actual storytelling seems to matter less and less as the visuals take over. But I think because of this particularity and his ever-growing focus on a constructed aesthetic, it can be easy to miss the heart and emotion that lie at the center of his films. Because looking at the thread that connects all his films reveals something else. That in this curation, there will always be chaos. Order has always been a necessity for Wes Anderson's films. Even in a disordered, chaotic world, characters inhabit storybook homes with everything exactly in its right place, without being aware of it. This aesthetic emerged early. Even in Bottle Rocket, there are aspects of it, in the way Owen Wilson's Dignan discusses his plans for robberies, what characters wear for their crimes and heists, and how robberies are executed. By the time we reach Anderson's most critically and commercially acclaimed film, The Grand Budapest Hotel, that particularity continues to shine through.
What is a lobby boy? A lobby boy is completely invisible, yet always in sight. A lobby boy remembers what people hate. A lobby boy anticipates the client's needs before the needs are needed.
Anderson very rarely uses real-life locations, or at least names them in his films, instead opting to create fictitious towns and cities largely based on others, like the unnamed version of New York in The Royal Tenenbaums, or Ennui-sur-Glacé in The French Dispatch. And in his construction, Anderson controls the exact looks of his environments, curating specific places with history. These places have their own rules and conventions, both in social norms and declarations, with actions expected to proceed in a certain way.
His papers are in order. I cross-referenced them myself with the Bureau of Labor and Servitude. You can't arrest him simply because he's a bloody immigrant. He hasn't done anything wrong.
And characters have roles in maintaining order, including maintaining the status quo, whether or not they see themselves as being active in that role or noticing they play a role at all. Wes Anderson uses the family structure in most, if not all, his films to define his characters, as we learn the most often through others rather than just themselves. Often his characters are important people otherwise. Steve Zissou is a marine explorer, or Gustav H. is Europe's premier concierge. And sometimes characters just feign that importance as a status symbol. But both have to maintain order, managing their teams with precision, either in immaculate spaces or environments that, while visually messy, seemingly don't have a single prop out of place. These teams, while not blood-related, still act as families with patriarchs, matriarchs, weird cousins, and the novice trying to learn from the expert. It's these relationships that tell us more than any in-world book or magazine could. But in a way, Anderson runs with this idea of fictionalization and storytelling, the orderly proceedings from one chapter to the next, to allow his constructed worlds to unravel and lose control.
I hereby place you under arrest for the murder of Madame Celine Villeneuve de Goffin-Taxis.
I knew there was something fishy. We never got the cause of death. She's been murdered. And you think I did it.
Hey!
In her book on Wes Anderson, Donna Kornhaber takes the approach of looking at Wes Anderson as a collector of aesthetics, movements, characters, and themes. But something she recognizes is that despite that order created, the actors, camera, and production design moving like clockwork, there was a disorder that festers in Anderson's aesthetically perfect worlds. To those who look beyond the careful design of Anderson's frames, the universe depicted inside those brightly colored and well-ordered images can be decidedly dark and disordered. Despite the choreography of his work, chaos still finds a way into Anderson's stories. And at the heart of it, that juxtaposition is what makes Anderson's style and his attention to detail so prevalent. As his filmography has grown and his work has become more meta and artsy, for lack of a better word, Many have paid less attention to his stories, often criticizing his narrative form or that his films aren't about anything or are about the same things. And I think those are all fair arguments. Without a doubt, Anderson heavily invests in the aesthetic of his films to the point where it can be distracting to the story. I felt that way the first time I watched both Moonrise Kingdom and The French Dispatch. But if you can, try listening to what Anderson has to say. He certainly has a lot, both in the darker themes he chooses and in terms of his fast-paced dialogue. His characters live in orderly worlds, unaware of the constructed environments Wes has created, and while many are aware of a general order of the world, they are still subject to mounting events which are out of their control, wanting things to change or to go back to the way they once were.
I'm trying to tell you the truth about myself.
I don't care about the truth about yourself.
This story is too predictable.
Predictable, really? What happens in the end?
In the end, we all die. Unless you change.
And despite living in candy-coated worlds, Wes's characters still deal with depression and anxiety. And just like in real life, reactions may not be as heartfelt or dramatic as they would seem to be in the movies.
Is it dark?
Of course it's dark. It's a suicide note.
All right, that's enough.
I think a big part of calling Wes Anderson's films devoid of emotion is a result of his writing style. To me, Anderson has his emotional points.
What happened in the end?
In the end, they shot him.
But just as in reality, these moments are fleeting. Death happens quickly and unceremoniously. Royal Tenenbaum dies in the back of an ambulance. The brothers in the Darjeeling Limited try and save a drowning boy. And Zero Mustafa's Agatha dies from an absurd little disease, a statement he makes as we watch them marry. Yes, death and suffering hang on to us, but it's in the quick moments of talking about someone's death, that one minute they're there and the next they aren't, which is at the heart of Wes Anderson. If anything, his combinations of visual aesthetics and melancholic themes displays the absurdity of keeping order as disorder emerges, something more of us out here in reality can't avoid either. As Anderson's filmography progresses, the story might seem to take a backseat to aesthetics, but I think now more than ever he has his moments that indicate something central to the story, or rather stories. Because Wes Anderson has used layers of storytelling since his earliest films. The Royal Tenenbaums is technically a book, and so is the Grand Budapest Hotel, which is narrated by the author, who has the story told to him by the hotel's owner. Or The French Dispatch is the visual telling of the final edition of the magazine of the same name, with its obituary planned by the editor-in-chief himself. Anderson's films drift and make important moments out of seemingly insignificant ones, but it's being aware of the story and having an authorial voice to tell it that shows what Anderson and his characters deem significant and matter to them at their emotional cores.
6 months into the run, the company received the news. A catastrophic automobile accident. Conrad Earp, American playwright, unequaled in passion and imagination, dead at 50.
Asteroid City is Wes Anderson's latest film, and one that falls into the same style over substance debate. And like many of his past films, it is also a story within a story, a fictional play televised in order to show how a theater production and the creative process emerges. The film is all the classic signifiers of a Wes Anderson film, a particular color palette, dusty like old postcards of Route 66, a mix of live action, puppetry, and miniatures, production design focused on specifically crafted sets and props, and an ensemble cast of distinct and quirky characters, all of whom seem somewhat stiff in their line deliveries. Because of this, because of the numerous characters to keep track of, because of the quirky dialogue and near absurd intricacies, there is a point of what is Asteroid City about? Is there anything of substance there, or is it just another example of style taking over? I think the point of Asteroid City, if there even is one, and there doesn't have to be, is not quite what Wes Anderson is saying about the world, but rather how he is saying it. As with his other films that are about storytelling, each character has a defined role. August Steenbeck as a war photojournalist, his son Woodrow as the Brainiac, an A-list actress like Midge Campbell arriving with her intellectual daughter Dinah. But these roles are even further defined by literally being roles. Bryan Cranston, the narrator of the television production, introduces all the players at breakneck speed, and while we find out little about what the actors are like, we know that some draw similarities to the characters they play. The actor who plays Augie, Jones Hall, has uncertainties about the role he plays, just as his character has uncertainties about what may come to Earth from outer space. The events taking place in Asteroid City are written by the playwright Conrad Earp, someone akin to Tennessee Williams or Arthur Miller in prowess. They are fictional events created to tell a story because it is the story that fictional Conrad wants to tell, and in turn a story that the audience watching the production can understand. And with this film being the first one set in the United States since Moonrise Kingdom, there perhaps is something deeper to what Wes Anderson is saying about the time and place he's crafted.
One of the sort of subtexts of our movie has something to do with how this placid period of the 50s is filled with anxiety and a sort of these men with post-traumatic stress disorder that's undiagnosed and that is being dealt with through their families. And by the time we get 10 years later, the effect that it will have had on the next generation will be so significant that there'll be a complete shift.
Asteroid City is an American story taking place in the mid-1950s, a story that understands both the whimsy of space just outside of our reach, but knowing that exploration might open a can of worms to things we might not want to discover. Both world wars are mentioned throughout the film, with General Gibson telling the children that,
"If you wanted to live a nice, quiet, peaceful life, you picked the wrong time to get born." That's the speech.
And despite the curiosity and wonder and innovation, the Stargazers competition is a way for the military to utilize their inventions as weapons against extraterrestrial forces. Uncertainty and anxiety permeates both the production of Asteroid City as well as the events of the play. But I think the seeming lack of emotion in the delivery of the actors means that the depth of anxiety can be hard to pick up on. Augie waits to tell his children that their mother has died, but their reactions are, in a way, appropriate, with an older child like Woodrow saying he already somehow knew, and his younger siblings not quite understanding. When the alien does touch down on Earth, the moment is significant, but not necessarily grandiose. As the alien arrives, the music swells, but then immediately becomes quiet, with the music ringing the same way the beeps and blips appear, like some sort of code. This motif also appears later, almost indicating that the sound of the film should quiet down so we can focus on what's happening on screen and what people are saying. Because as everyone holds their breath, the alien takes the asteroid, poses for a photo, then swiftly departs. It's a big moment of the play and of the film, but just like all of Wes Anderson's other films, it's almost subtle. Nobody has time to say anything, and in the aftermath, the anxiety exists at a low but constant level. The kids are unsure of what the alien was, but are unafraid of contacting him, using their tools and brains to come up with a plan. They band together, understanding that their brainiac qualities, their feelings of not belonging, are something that makes them perfect for solving this problem. As Asteroid City enters a quarantine, Augie is the most vocal about his worries, again reflecting the undercurrent of paranoia in the idealized 1950s. Other characters find ways to get on with their lives, like Mitch Campbell, who has Augie run lines with her, something that allows him to channel his grief. So even while they are stuck in Asteroid City, they still try to keep some sense of order. What I intended is that the people telling the story are part of the story, and they're taking everything from their lives that they do and don't understand and trying to make something out of it and find answers, or at least explore the right questions. Conrad Earp writes the story of Asteroid City, implanting his own uncertainty about the development of the play and the content. The piece is something that evolves. It is unfinished while he is casting. And with his sudden death, the show must go on, even if the actors are still unsure of what it means.
Right. Well, that's my question. I still don't understand the play.
Doesn't matter. Just keep telling the story. You're doing them right.
To keep telling the story, not because of what it's about, but because the act of storytelling is something in and of itself important, is what matters. Jones Hall seeks an explanation for the story he's helping to tell, stating that Earp has written dialogue alluding to the meaning of life, but can't seem to find one in between the lines. Anderson's characters have always dealt with this issue. In a 2012 interview with Cahiers du Cinema, Anderson says, "I don't know whether they find the meaning of life. We should probably assume that we will never discover it. The organization is a kind of metaphor for art, reorganizing life in such a way that everything makes sense. We are all looking for harmony, for inspiration, and sometimes when regarding a work of art, one has the feeling that this work explains us, touches our identity. For me, this is the strongest experience of art." Reorganization, taking life as we know it, compartmentalizing it, creating frames into which we see the world, but nevertheless finding disorder, senselessness, and absurdity is something that is realistic and something that all of us experience out here, as well as in film. Shortly after discussing the meaning of life with his director, Jones Hall takes a break on the fire escape. Suddenly, Augie's deceased wife, or rather the actress who played her, appears across the alley. In the same Cahiers du Cinema interview, West discusses his fascination with theater, especially when the curtain falls and the actors bow, when they are still in costume but the expression on their faces has changed because they are no longer in character. Margot Robbie's character, the unnamed actress playing Augie's wife, is a great example of this, still knowing her lines from months previous. But Asteroid City explores a kind of performance emerging during the time period where actors used the method to channel their emotions into the characters. A character like Jones Hall can give the performance of a lifetime because he's able to channel his own grief after Conrad, his lover, dies in a car accident.
Then you take a picture of me and start crying. And I say, I hope it comes out.
And I say, all my pictures come out.
Things will work themselves out in the end. While someone like Augie is a trained war photographer, there is still time between taking the photo and developing it that will work itself out. Sometimes all that's needed is a little faith, even if someone like Augie doesn't believe in God. He's a director with a great empathy for folks who don't fit completely comfortably into the worlds they find themselves in. Without even lecturing us, he leads us to question those worlds, and the one we find ourselves in too. Asteroid City is an anxious world. Like all of Wes Anderson's other films, it is immaculately crafted, but deeply flawed, changing when characters don't want it to, or not changing fast enough. But it's that these worlds function that way, these seemingly aesthetically perfect worlds, that proves no matter how much control one has over their perceived environment, tragedy, hardship, and death will always find a way in. That's not to say that there aren't celebrations and wonderful moments in Wes Anderson's films. There certainly are. But that mix of good and bad, and the way that impacts us and his characters, are what makes for a great story.